Hi, everybody. Welcome back to PCS 101. And this is for our class for Thursday, the 8th of August, where we are nearing the ending of the semester, believe it or not, and getting ready for our third and final graded speech. And that happens to be the persuasive speech. So, as you can see in the notes below, this will be due on Tuesday, the 13th. It will be a 15-minute speech, so it's 5 minutes longer than your informative speech. And for this particular speech, you are being asked to use three outside resources. And we talked a little bit about the library and some of the different sorts of resources that you could use. You can use any combination that you'd like, and I stopped counting after three. And I would like that you list the information about your sources on your course outline, which of course, or on your speaking outline, which of course you will be submitting into me. As I review your speaking outline, I'll be able to see what the sources were that you used. In the real world, you wouldn't be showing your speaking outline to anybody. But again, since this is a workshop situation, I wanted to take a quick peek and take a quick look at your sources. The good news is that this is not a formal academic paper, so you don't need to follow any particular guidelines or format for listing your sources, whether you use MLA or APA. Basically, I just want to see the basic pieces of information. In other words, the author, the date of publication, the publisher, things of that nature. It doesn't have to be in any particular style or in any particular format. And as we had talked about, that you don't need to inundate the audience with all of this minutia. You just want to give a tag to let them know when you are using outside resources. Something like according to experts, for instance, would work very nicely. It's up to you as to whether or not you want to use audio visuals. As you probably saw with your second speech, audio visuals certainly are helpful in terms of being able to relay information, but it also is yet one additional piece that you have to manipulate when you are delivering your speech. So what I've tried to do with all three speeches is to divide the speeches up into different skill areas. So the third speech, which is probably the most challenging, the persuasive speech, is the longest of the speeches, in part because you will be incorporating outside resources. And I wouldn't at all be surprised if you utilized all of the elements that we've talked about thus far this semester. So you might be making references to yourself in the way you did in the autobiographical speech. And you will certainly be sharing information the way you did during the informative speech. The trick, of course, is that the persuasive speech is a speech that is difficult to deliver because your audience might have very firmly embedded beliefs or value systems that you are going to be unable to change, and that's fine. The goal is just to earn your audience's respect, not necessarily to change everybody's opinion or have everybody support your particular opinion. So, at the very least, those individuals who agreed with you before you began speaking should still agree with you when you are done speaking. But outside of that, what you're looking for is what I call the swing vote. You know, you're going to have three elements in your audience: those people who already agree with you, those people who vehemently disagree with you, and there's nothing you can say or do to change their minds, and then the people on the fence. And what you're doing is you're planting a seed, and it might take years actually for this seed to grow. So you may not necessarily persuade somebody in the moment, but you are giving them something to think about. And you could be trying to persuade them to take an action. You could be trying to persuade them to support a belief, or it could be a combination of the two. They all come with different challenges. So I think about how some speeches um, are very obvious, where everybody, or seemingly everybody, agrees. For instance, eating better and exercising. Yet being able to incorporate that action, that's the hard part for anybody who's ever tried to implement those things in their life. And you need to think about that when you are delivering your speech. It's not so much talking about the benefits of, let's say, exercise, but how are you going to address the fact that most people are going to have, or at least some people are going to have, okay, I am going to have some difficulty in being able to incorporate that into my busy lifestyle. And, I think about beliefs, and I always use the example of somebody who signs a petition. Just because somebody who signed a petition, or just because somebody signs a petition, that doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with what it is they're signing. There could be many reasons why they are signing that petition. It could be a good photo op, or they might want other people to think that that's their position when it really isn't. It could just easily be an attempt to make the person with the petition go away as soon as possible. So, again, actions can be tricky, and I encourage you to not necessarily shy away from controversial topics. If you can't talk about controversial topics in an academic setting, then you can't talk about controversial topics at all. But if you feel uncomfortable with talking about hot button topics, you don't necessarily have to. Think about your daily life and all of the things that you wish were different. And some of them are large, but some of them can be quite small. It could be as simple as adding a stop sign at an intersection that you happen to pass by every day that you wish that someone would do just for safety. So, whether it be highly controversial or not controversial or something in between, of course, we want to maintain ethos, which is ethics. Of course, we want to be audience centered, think about the needs and the expectations of the audience. Of course, we want to be respectful, and we want to earn our audiences, um, if not admiration, at least respect. And think about that you need to choose a topic that can be debated, that's something that reasonable people could disagree about. And think about the opposing side. A lot of times people ignore the opposing side, which more often than not angers the opposing side because it's as if they don't exist. It's what I call the elephant in the room. Better to at least address it and perhaps talk about why the arguments of the opposing side are not as strong as your arguments. This, of course, is a tricky balancing act because you have only 15 minutes, even though that might seem like a lifetime. And certainly, you don't want to lose control of the speech to the point where now you're talking about the opposing side rather than your side. Outside sources help to increase credibility. It's one of the many reasons why you're using outside resources for this speech. And the textbook talked a little bit about ways to motivate an audience. And there are things called motivational appeals. In fact, this is quite a complex subject matter that is simplified, oversimplified in our textbook. I just wanted to very briefly touch upon it. The idea of how do you motivate an individual or convince an individual is obviously something of high interest to politicians and businesses and so forth. But generally speaking, again, if we're going to oversimplify, there are three ways to motivate an individual: affiliation, which means belonging, you want to be part of the group; achievement, which means success, which in some ways is the exact opposite of being part of the group. You want to be better than the group; and then finally, power or control. And, I think about how oftentimes consumers are exposed to these sorts of motivational appeals for products. Take a car, for instance, which is usually a big purchase. Affiliation or belonging, the number one vehicle, everyone's driving this. Achievement or success, if you drive this particular car brand, this shows that you have a certain amount of wealth or you've achieved a certain amount of success in your workplace. And then power or control, that regardless of the car you buy, you may not necessarily have power or control at home or in the workplace, but your vehicle allows you to basically control the environment within it. Now, there is another way that you can motivate an audience. It's highly effective, but also highly dangerous, and it's fear. And we oftentimes see fear being used as a way to motivate individuals. Use cautiously because fear interferes with reasoning. People aren't able to think. But think about how oftentimes we've seen fear used in something as simple as a weather forecast, for instance, clickbait. When we're on the internet, that a storm is coming, and of course we click, and then we find out that it's not in our area, or this is perhaps an older article, or the likelihood is quite small, but the idea is that you are fearful of what could happen. And sometimes fear can be used well. You think about smoking ads, for instance, public service ads about the dangers of smoking leading to disease. And that fear is supposed to motivate an individual to stop smoking. So in this instance, I suppose fear is being used for the greater good. But you want to be very, very cautious when you're using fear, that you again are being ethical about it, the ethos, and you're understanding that when individuals are motivated by fear, they oftentimes lose their ability to reason. Now, there was a theorist named Monroe who came up with a sequence of events that usually happens when you are trying to convince someone of something. I'm happy to say that this is a sequence of events that I think that we've been practicing in our autobiographical and also our informative speeches as well. You need to get your audience's attention, first of all. Then you need to show that there's some sort of a need, there's some sort of an issue that needs to be addressed. This is quite useful for the persuasive speech. And then you want to offer an opportunity for satisfaction. How are you going to satisfy or fulfill that need? Visualization, the idea of being able to show what will happen if that action is put into place, or what will happen if that action is not put into place. And this is where you could ask for a call for action. Some speeches want you to do something, some speeches just want you to support a policy. So that said, what you're doing is you're putting forth an argument. And when we talk about arguments in English classes, for instance, or in public speaking classes, what we're saying is you're making a claim, you're taking a position upon which reasonable people can disagree, and then you're providing evidence and using some sort of reasoning pattern in order to support that particular position. Think about what lawyers do in the courtroom, and I oftentimes use that analogy when I'm talking about writing papers as well. Is that you've got the defense, you've got the prosecution. There are two positions, and a good lawyer can argue either side with the same evidence. Of course, the evidence might be stronger on one side or another, but good lawyers know how to pick and choose their evidence, so they are putting together the strongest argument possible. That's really what you're doing when you are trying to persuade someone of something. So there are lots of different claims, and sometimes these claims sound like they aren't something that reasonable people could debate, but they could be. Think about a claim of fact. Fact, and we talked about this on the quiz. It's something that can be proven externally. It's not a belief. But take the fact of GCC is a small school, which it is, but in comparison to what? GCC might seem like a very large school, or a claim of value that something is good or bad. And that can be subjective. Again, I'll use GCC. GCC is a good school. How do we evaluate that? Is it through anecdotal evidence? Is it through graduation rates? Or how about a claim of policy that an action should be taken? And of course, the difficulty with this is that you don't know what's going to happen until the action is put into place. Let's say, again with GCC, we should reestablish a sports program. We used to have one, was eliminated because of financial issues. And then we can debate back and forth about whether or not we're in a better or worse financial position at GCC since we don't have a sports program. So obviously it saves money and, let's say, staff and equipment, but it could also negatively impact enrollment if students are attending other institutions for their sports offerings. So, what you're trying to do, in addition to proposing a claim, is to have some sort of a reasoning pattern. And there are different ways that you could go about reasoning. They tend to blend into one another. Think about inductive reasoning, that you use multiple examples to come to a conclusion. Medical studies are a great example of that, that after multiple medical studies, this particular medication seems to be effective. That's not to say it's foolproof. We've had many instances where a medication has been released and then has been withdrawn because it isn't as effective as was initially thought. Or deductive reasoning. This is where you are making a generalization based on examples. So, for instance, college leads to success is probably something that you all have some buy in into because you are taking this class, for instance. And college does lead to success, not always. But Again, when you are deducing something, you know that it's a generalization. That doesn't mean that everything is going to fit into that generalization. Or reasoning from sign and observable mark. So think about something like a sore throat, for instance. That could be the sign to you that that means that you are getting a head cold. And of course, you've had enough examples. You can induce that this is what usually happens before a head cold, that you have a sore throat. So you can deduce that this sore throat means that you're getting a head cold. Um, there are lots of errors in reasoning. Reasoning is not foolproof. I just direct you to things like the political arena to see all of the errors in reasoning. And we all use errors in reasoning. The thing is that if we're putting a speech together, we want to try to avoid as many errors in reasoning as possible. And if we're consuming a speech, remember the consumer imperative we talked about at the beginning of the semester. Well, you want to listen for errors in reasoning and you want to call the speaker on that. So, just a few of the errors, and again, this could be a semester in and of itself. A hasty generalization. So, you're drawing a conclusion from too little evidence. Again, it's very common. I think about this time of the year where there are decisions made about opening and closing classes, and how much evidence do you need in order to be able to make a foolproof decision? It's a thankless job. I'm glad it's not my job. Um, just because there isn't an enrollment in a particular course, that doesn't mean the course isn't popular. Perhaps it's at a bad time. Perhaps it's the teacher who is not popular and not necessarily the course. There are lots of outside factors that could play a role. The appeal to ignorance. In other words, you're putting the burden on proving something on someone else rather than yourself. So I could easily say something to the effect that I'm a space alien, and until you can prove that I'm not, I am. And again, this is an error in reasoning. The burden of proof should be on me. The bandwagon fallacy, what I call the teenager argument, everybody's doing it, so you want to do it as well. The sequential fallacy, that one thing that occurs first causes the second, that there's a direct connection between cause and effect. Sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. So perhaps you performed poorly on the quiz because you were ill. Well, that makes sense. But perhaps you've been performing poorly on quizzes your entire life, so the status of your health is irrelevant. So you can see how cause and effect isn't necessarily always something that is valid. Begging the question, which is rephrasing the question. It's circular reasoning, in effect. So asking something to the effect of, I'm trying to think of a good example. What is empathic listening? It's listening with empathy. I mean, basically, you've just rephrased the question. A question that actually was asked on the quiz. The idea was that you would define empathy, being emotionally supportive, which is what I hope all of us are in terms of listening to the speeches of our classmates. We may not necessarily agree with the speaker's perspective, but again, if the speaker is being respectful to us, we want to be respectful to the speaker. The appeal to authority. This sounds valid. It's not necessarily. Oftentimes, again, this is done in consumer situations where there might be a celebrity endorsement of something. And the idea is that you perhaps have some respect or esteem for this celebrity. So, therefore, you want to emulate them. So, you want to use their phone service, let's say. But the fact that they're a great singer doesn't necessarily mean that they're experts in phone carriers. So that's not necessarily the best endorsement. So they're presented as an authority, but they're not necessarily an authority on the subject matter. They are authoritative in the sense that they have celebrities, so they bring a certain cachet with them. Name calling. An attack on an individual. It's what I call the schoolyard argument. And unfortunately, we've seen more and more of this in the political arena. And I think about a video that I show that perhaps in some ways indicated where we would be in our political environment. And I have included a brief clip of that in the notes below, as well as an article about it, where basically it was a situation of a debate And debates are very similar to public speaking. There were two college teams who were debating one another, and the debate judges are basically the professors from the two colleges. And I can give you very quickly some background, but you can watch the clip and you can also read the article. What ended up happening is that the debate went very badly. And I'm assuming that what you're guessing is that, well, obviously the students, the debaters, lost control of the debate and were disrespectful to one another. No, that's not what happened. It was the professors who lost control of the debate and were disrespectful to each other. So that there was lots of name calling and lots of other errors in reasoning. Now, this is a complex situation where they were talking about a very heated topic, race relations. There was some bad blood in history between these two professors from different institutions. One of the professors, female and black, the other professor, male and Caucasian. So there are lots of variables here. And I'm not showing this to try to indicate that one was right or one was wrong. They were both wrong. But when you get to the point where you are shouting obscenities at one another, and it ended with, or came close to ending with, it turns out one of the professors, the Caucasian male, lowering his pants and mooning the other professor. Yes, you heard me right. And he was wearing underwear, so I guess we could talk about whether or not that's a true mooning. Um, the result of all of this, one of the professors was fired, the Caucasian male. The other professor was put on probation, the black female. And again, this is not to in any way suggest that one was in the right or one was in the wrong, or that one punishment is correct or one punishment is incorrect. I'm less interested in the situation, and I'm more interested in how this applies to us. How easy it is to lose control of intellect when emotion gets in the way. These are two highly educated individuals who basically are professors of communication. They devoted their careers to this. And if you push the right buttons, which happened in this incident, well, then you can see what happens. It was an incident that was never meant to be recorded, but of course, we live in the video age. And while this is an older situation, someone still had access to being able to video it and also or to record it and to post it online. And as many attempts that are made to take down this event, it's put back right up. So at least at the time of my posting, you should be able to access at least a brief video clip where they're literally screaming profanities at one another. And I show you this to encourage you to not emulate their behavior. This is not the way that you disagree with someone. And I've oftentimes said that I wish our politicians could debate as well as our students. I've seen my students be respectful and thoughtful and intelligent in a way that I haven't necessarily seen in the political arena, and it saddens me greatly. So I think we should expect more and demand more, as I said at the very beginning of the semester when we were talking about the consumer imperative again and consuming speeches. There's also another error in reasoning that is quite common in the workplace, actually, genetic fallacy. It's a past practice, so therefore, just because we've always done it, we should do it that way. Yes, there is some value to tradition, and certainly our legal system is based on precedent. But just because you've always done something a particular way, that doesn't mean that it's efficient or effective. And again, the workplace is a great example of that. So, all of this hopefully is information that you can use for your persuasive speech. And I also wanted you to, for the rest of this class, so I want to keep this short, I wanted you to be able to watch your peers' informative speech. You've posted your informative speech, speech number 2, but now it's time for you to watch your peers' informative speech, much like you did with speech number 1, the autobiographical. So this is the 4th section in the notes below, where I'm asking you to identify just one strength and one weakness. It could just be a word or two of each of your peer speeches. Send that to my email, Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu by Saturday the 10th. And if you need an extension, please ask me beforehand. I will compile all of the information that I've gotten, and then I will present that to you in the following class. And what's left for today is quiz number 3. And at this point, you've already taken 2 quizzes, so you know the process. The last question of the quiz will be asking you about, well, the next speech. So question 20 on quiz 3 is going to ask you about the persuasive speech. You're not committed to your answer, but the idea is that you're thinking about what you might be discussing and what outside resources you'll use. Please send that via PDF to my email, again at Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu by Saturday the 10th. And where that will leave us is with finally presenting, or uploading, I should say, speech number 3. That'll be Tuesday the 13th, and our very last class will be that Thursday, where you will be asked to watch the speeches of all of your classmates for speech 3. Send me feedback, and there will be quiz number 4. And I dropped the lowest quiz grade, so it turns out if you've taken the first 3 quizzes and you are happy with your grade, you can elect not to take the 4th quiz. But for any of you who missed a quiz or perhaps performed poorly on a quiz, you've got that 4th quiz that you have the option of taking. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. And certainly contact me if you've got any questions or concerns about the upcoming speech, or if you'd like to run ideas, outlines, drafts, practice speeches, whatever the case may happen to be. Again, I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. And we will continue on next class. Take care. Bye-bye.